Ladies and gentlemen, this is El Cochino, Tom Lawler, and I'd like to welcome you to the podcast that puts the lotion on its own skin, LuchaWorld. Bitchin'.
Welcome everyone to LuchaWorld Podcast episode number 116, the first episode of the new year, 2020. Who would have thought we would still be doing podcasts at this point in time? Looking back, I've been posting a lot of the podcasts on YouTube, on the Retro Wrestling YouTube channel, and I can't believe Kurt and I have done podcasts for 10 years, over 10 years now. It's crazy. We actually did an entire decade of podcasts, and it doesn't seem like it's a lot, but I thought when I started uploading them onto YouTube, I thought it was going to take me like 2 weeks to upload, and I'm still doing it, and I think I think it's already been 6 weeks, and still uploading them, and I think I'm halfway done with the old Slam and Stan episodes, and I am probably a third done with LuchaWorld, the LuchaWorld podcast. So it's actually taking longer than I expected. But yeah, we've been doing a lot of podcasts. Haven't done one in a while because I think I did one with the Lucha Talk on Lucha Talk with Dylan and Microman Fever in mid-December, our year-end show. And like I said, also in previous episodes, it's kind of hard to do a secondary Lucha Libre podcast when you're doing one already for Lucha Talk, and having to repeat myself kind of gets a little bit difficult to do just for myself personally. So honestly, if you want to listen to Lucha Podcast, you can listen to Lucha Talk and Lucha World. And if I'm not doing it on Lucha World, you'll just find it on Lucha Talk on the MLW radio network. But I think the last podcast we did was mid-December, and I don't even think we talked about Guerra de Titanes, but that's really the last big show of the year for AAA. And then CML had a bunch of shows, going after that, but we usually take that time off because CML doesn't really do a lot during the holidays. They started doing these year-end like the year-end Sin Piedad show, and then the first show of the year they always had on Fridays. They usually have like a best of show. Well, this time they kind of didn't have a deep enough roster to really do a best of, or they really didn't even try to do a best of. Honestly, I think it's more that, because I still think they have a good enough roster where they could put together 6 good matches. But at CMLL, their booking committee their programming department has really gone to lunch the past year and a half. They haven't, even longer than that. They go through in the past they would go through cycles where they would not have anything to do. But the last year it's been really difficult to watch CMLL, and in the last couple of months it's been very repetitive, and that's basically what we've had since late December and into 2020 with some of the shows that they've had. They've started off the year with half the crew. I think it was like 15 guys going to Fantastica Mania, and usually that means about 2 weeks of CMLL just pretty much doing the same match on same shows, same matches on every show. Kind of unfortunate. They had a Rey de Reyes, which was actually pretty good. Templario won it, and they didn't really have a lot of high flyers, but they really went out of their way to do a lot of stuff. And you basically had Black Panther doing, I think he did maybe like 6 or 7 tope suicidas in the match, and Templario was really good in it. There were a couple of good performances, and it actually ended up being a good match, but you kind of wish they would have used a few more high flyers in this. They had way fewer high flyers than in previous Reyes del Aire Torneos Cibernéticos. We also had in, what was it, the Christmas show? They had, I think that was was the Christmas show or the New Year's show? One of those shows they had Espíritu Negro lose his mask to Príncipe Diamante. Then we got the news that Príncipe Diamante was going to be regimmicked as Diamond. And if you saw the Diamond character, basically it looks like a ripoff, a knockoff of El Hijo del Santos mask and look. And it's already bad enough that they're doing that. But then what do they do with Diamond? Very first few appearances, he basically loses. So he's pretty much the same person, just losing in different fashions, I guess. I thought it was funny that when he did the CMLL Informa appearance where he debuted his new look as Diamond. He talked about how he was going to be the man to lead Lucha Libre into its next boom. And what happened? Pretty much that got diminished rather quickly. I don't think the last person that did that led the boom in Lucha Libre got jobbed that quickly, or at least he was given better performances. And of course, I'm talking about Mystico, the first Mystico, or the first CMLL Mystico, who's now Caristico. I don't know. I don't really see much going on with that. It's been a pretty quiet period for CMLL. I don't see it really changing that much, other than, probably once Dos Leyendas starts, and maybe, who knows, maybe Bandito starts maybe he finally figures out how to work within the system of CMLL, which he had a match with Cuatrero, which got a lot of negative feedback from a lot of fans, and a lot of them were kind of blaming Bandito when, the truth was that Cuatrero was working a CMLL very basic type of match, not even trying to get out of, change the way the match was going to work, which was unfortunate for Bandito and for us watching. For the most part, CMLL the last month or so has really been something where you just pick certain matches that you're going to watch, and the ones you pick out, they still have enough talent where they can actually pull off one good match per show. Sometimes they don't, especially in Puebla. But I think the Tuesday shows, they've had at least one good match every so often. And Fridays have been very difficult to watch. Those are the shows that I usually watch the majority of the matches. And unfortunately, watching that hasn't been that great lately. AAA should be starting up, I think, this Saturday. So they're back to their schedule, and they already have announced a February show. So they should be running more frequently. And thank goodness Mas Lucha is around and uploading more shows. I think there's a couple of other promotions that are going to start doing a few more streaming, although they're on services that you're going to have to pay for, but at least you have additional options for watching Lucha. That maybe you're kind of burned out on watching CML and you want to watch some alternatives. Really, the big news, and the reason I'm doing this podcast, is that there's really 3 big stories that happened since the last show that I did with, which was the Lucha Talk show. I mean, there was a lot more that happened since I did the last LuchaWorld podcast, but since we haven't done a Lucha Talk in a while, I want to talk about the 3 major stories that have gone on. Of course, unfortunately, there were a lot of luchadors that passed away from, I would guess, mid-December to what we are right now, mid-January, late January. We had Alberto Munoz pass away, El Marquez pass away, a couple of older wrestlers that haven't been active in years, in several years, I mean decades. They passed away. There's been a couple of indie wrestlers that have passed away as well. But the big ones were really that I think more fans felt, had a greater impact on fans, and the reaction to their passings were, of course, the unfortunate and untimely passings of Mr. Niebla and La Parka AAA. Mr. Niebla passed away early Monday, December 23rd, at the age of 46. Really sad story. He had actually, several months prior to that, he had been talking about how he wasn't wrestling because he had a blood infection. So that's what happened. Because at that time, a lot of people were wondering maybe he was suspended by CMLL, maybe he was, having issues, with his battle with alcoholism. And what it turned out was that he actually was he was basically dealing with his blood infection. I think he spent a while in the hospital. I think it was in October when he was in the hospital for an extended period of time. Then I think sometime in November, I think it was right before Thanksgiving, he did an interview with Shocker from his home, so he's already at home, but he was still recovering and dealing with the blood infection. And then in I think that weekend prior to that Monday, December 23rd, Mr. Niebla was taken back to the hospital dealing with this issue, and he unfortunately passed away on December 23rd. Really, really sad to hear this. I think it's kind of something where I think with both La Parka and Mr. Niebla, because they went through something, that was so public. La Parka with his injury during a match in late October, and then Mr. Niebla battling alcoholism. I think a lot of people kind of were a little more prepared to, or were expecting this possibility as, this outcome as a possibility because, of course, of everything they were going through. Very unfortunate. Mr. Niebla, I think a lot of fans, the one thing everybody remembers, of course, is his current gimmick of being the leader of the La Peste Negra, El Rey de Guangaco, or however they say it, El Apestoso Mayor. He was one of those fun-loving luchadors, and the last couple of years, not only did we get to see like that fun-loving character, but we also kind of got to see the other side of that, of what was Mr. Niebla, which was a man battling, dealing with alcoholism. If you were watching CMLL in the last 3 or 4, 5 years, you would watch, you could remember episodes of CML shows were on television. I think there might have been a few that were streaming also, because initially we would see it on television, and then when when they started being more, CML was streaming more frequently, we started seeing more of this happening, where you would see Mr. Niebla in no condition to wrestle actually be on shows, and we would see Nero Casas, Felino, or any of his opponents, or, his partners, his opponents, kind of just like helping him through the match or keeping him out of it, just to make sure that nothing would happen and nobody would get hurt. Of course, there was that one match where Volador Jr. Quickly unmasked them and got the DQ loss just because of how bad Mr. Niebla was as far as being able to perform for that show. And I think it became more of a, he kind of became more of a, his fans could forgive and overlook that. But then you had a lot of newer fans and some of the more, I would guess it's more of an American fan than anything else, that saw that and was really concerned about him, and maybe wasn't happy that CMLL was putting him out there. And to be fair to CMLL, if it wasn't for, if CMLL wouldn't have put him out there, some other promotion would have done it, or an independent promotion. We've seen it a lot. We've seen it often with a lot of wrestlers who are probably shouldn't be wrestling, and they end up getting booked because it's wrestling. And overall, what a career he had. He started in CML in 1995, and right away he was one of those guys who was quickly pushed. He quickly was added to the Ola Azul trio, teaming up with Leesmark and Atlantis, and I think they won the CML World Trios titles, or one of the trios titles. I can't remember which one, but they were quickly like he was quickly one of those. Showed a lot of promise because he was a very, very different from what he later became more known for, where he was more of a comedy character and did more clowning around in the ring. He early on, he was very known for his high-flying athletic style of wrestling, and he was really good too, by the way. And around that time, another young wrestler was starting up as well, which was Shocker. And they CML put them both together. I think it was somewhere around late 97, early 98, where they were put together, and they became one of the top tag teams during that time period. Mr. Niebla was still teaming up with Ola Azul at that time. He suffered an injury, and then when he suffered that injury, they took him out of Ola Azul, but kept him in with teaming up with Shocker. And I think that was sometime in 98 when he suffered that injury. I think it was late 98. And around that time, CML had started elevating a lot of their young talent. And, obviously Mr. Niebla and Shocker were two of the wrestlers that they were going to elevate. And a couple of other wrestlers were added to that. Rey Bucanero, Ultimo Guerrero. I think Mr. Aguila was in that group as well. Tarzan Boy. So you had a lot of younger guys who were starting to get moved up, which was very different to what you see now in CML, where they haven't had a period where they've done that. But in 98, 99, they really went hard for that. And it probably helped that like the guys who were on top at that time were guys like Atlantis, Villano Tercero, Blue Panther, Nero Casas, guys who kind of weren't going to like hold guys down, compared to what you might see in other during different time periods where, guys are trying to protect their spots. At that point in time, you were starting to see some of the certain guys not there, and so they were starting to elevate guys. Dr. Wagner Jr. was another guy who was getting pushed, moved up up the cards. Actually, Dr. Wagner Jr. kind of got that also because of his tours with New Japan. So he was really becoming a hot name for CMLL as well. So his big push in 1998-99, and as I said, he suffered an injury. When he came back, Shocker was starting to do the heel turn, and it really became a big deal in, I think it was in the Dos Leyendas show when they wrestled against, I think it was the one of those a tournament final, and Shocker turned on Mr. Niebla, or was starting to like not be. He didn't turn on him. He's starting to like be a little bit more of a rudo. And at the end of the match, when they lost, Mr. Niebla went and shook hands with his opponents, and Shocker refused. And from that point forward, I would say from March all the way through May, June, Shocker did the heel turn, be it not refusing to tag into matches or kind of being a little more careless and getting involved in matches. And then finally he did the full on heel turn on Mr. Niebla. And I think it was in the summer 1999, he brought in, it was actually one of those memorable moments because he brought in the IWRG Mr. Niebla, who would later wrestle as Mr. Mexico for CMLL. And that led to the Mr. Niebla, IWRG Mr. Niebla feud. And then from there, they're basically using that to continue the Shocker feud with Mr. Niebla. But they kind of were able to throw in the IWRG Mr. Niebla feud, where they had a big mass match. I think it was in early August. And then from that point, then they went back to the Shocker Mr. Niebla feud. And they had a couple of bloody matches. There was a couple of tag matches and trios matches where they left each other very bloody in matches. There was I think the week before the anniversary show, they had Shocker teaming up with Villano Tercero versus Atlantis and Mr. Niebla. And they actually all left, as a brawl. Just to lead up to the anniversary show where, they very wild match. And then they got to the anniversary where, Mr. Niebla was able to unmask Shocker. It was a Relevos Increíbles match where Mr. Niebla and Shocker wrestled Atlantis and Villano Tercero. And Atlantis and Villano Tercero ended up winning, both saving each other's masks. And then Mr. Niebla and Shocker wrestled each other. And that is where Mr. Niebla unmasked Shocker, and Shocker ended up becoming a far bigger star because he unmasked, did the whole catchphrase of still being 1000% guapo, 1000% handsome, and I think that really kind of took Shocker to that next level. Whereas Mr. Niebla kind of became a main eventer, but he was always more of a worker and not really a huge star like Shocker would become. As part of Los Guapos. They still kind of kept them involved against each other, and Mr. Niebla was still very relevant because he was now a main event character, but he was, as a technical, he never was at that level of Shockers. And but they had an incredible run, and then in mid 2006, Mr. Niebla he got fired from CMLL because he had one of those moments where he was dealing with his drinking problem, and it had been something that had started early in his CMLL career. And he actually mentioned how after his passing, a lot of the people who knew him at that time kind of talked about how so many people would warn him about drinking, and he never really listened, and he was so like it's something that a lot of you see it you also used to see it in pro wrestling, in the United States, and I'm sure you see it in all of pro wrestling around the world. But in Mexico, it kind of is more of a cultural thing where you have a lot of luchadors who will go out drinking, or even like they'll drink in the locker room, have a couple of beers, maybe something a little harder, and if you don't, some guys can actually control it, others can't. And Mr. Niebla kind of fell into the whole can't category. And so he got fired from CMLL, but it kind of was a positive for him as far as in his career, because he ended up going to AAA, And that is really where he kind of developed his character, became more of a charismatic character, and he he kind of learned how to cut promos, something that isn't very common in CMLL, which is very unfortunate, because if you watch CMLL Informa, there are a lot of guys in CMLL who could actually cut promos, and we've seen it with a lot of guys when they go to AAA from CMLL that they actually are very good talkers, and they never get to do it because in CMLL that's not one of the things they do. It's a very traditional style of promoting and running shows where they give you the lineup, they give you the entire week's worth of lineups, and that's what they do. And maybe one person might issue a challenge post match, but usually guys don't really do a lot of promos. But because especially when they had TV at that time, where they never did anything like that. During that time period, they did it early on, but as the years went on, they kind of were starting to cut out the whole. When they stopped doing a lot of the skits on the CML TV shows, a lot of guys weren't doing as many. They weren't really learning how to do interviews and stuff like that, or cut promos. So while in AAA, Mr. Niebla was added to the Vipers. And that was a very, with Abismo Negro and the usual crew, those guys. And that was one of those things where you put two guys who were having issues, personal issues, Abismo Negro having issues with drugs, Mr. Niebla with alcoholism. And so you had Abismo Negro kind of no-show a lot of times. There were periods of times where he wasn't even around. And when that happened, at one point they decided to turn him technical and have those Vipers turn on him. So they were kind of setting up this big mass match in 2008, and it was going to happen in Triple Mania, and it was going to be Mr. Niebla and Abismo Negro in a mass versus mass match, which was going to be this huge thing. I think that probably would have ended up being one of the bigger mass matches in AAA history, just because at that point in time, Abismo Negro was a far bigger star than Mr. Niebla, actually, because the way he came across, he was like very charismatic, and to that crowd in AAA, he was the bigger star. And Mr. Niebla had the star factor because of him headlining anniversary shows and winning the Master Shocker, and he was pretty much still recognized as a star. But I think that would have been one of the bigger mass matches. Unfortunately, it didn't happen because obviously some people kind of blamed Abismo Negro, others blamed Mr. Niebla. But what ended up happening, and I think Mr. Niebla brought it up, what ended up happening was that Mr. Niebla kind of was concerned that he actually couldn't put his mask on the line, and he pretty much was told by CMLL that he did not own the rights to that name, and so they kind of used that as a way to supposedly this was his story, that was why that mask match could not happen, because he did not own the rights to the mask or the character Mr. Niebla. And when they were talking to him and telling him this, they told him that they made him an offer to return to CMLL as a way to make good, since he's not going to be able to headline a big show like Triple Mania. Hey, come back to CMLL and you'll be a main eventer over here. And he decided to return to CMLL. I think within a week after Triple Mania, because I think the Triple Mania main event ended up being like a cage match or something with the Vipers and a couple of other people involved in it. And Mr. Niebla ended up a week later he was working CMLL. He made his return, and at that point, 2008, he ends up teaming up with Negro Casas, and they start talking about possibly reforming La Ola Negra, which was one of Negro Casas' old trios back in the name of an old trio of Negro Casas in the mid 90s, when he was teaming up with Mano Negra and I think Black Magic at that point. And so they talked about it. They went to they still didn't have the third guy in this. They went and talked to Paco Alonso, and they told him about their idea about being La Ola Negra. He liked it, but Mr. Niebla suggested that they not go as Ola Negra, that they go as Peste Negra instead, because he kind of thought they were more of the initial group wasn't like going to be dirty, but it was going to be like Peste being an illness, a disease or whatever. So he kind of wanted to use that as more of a to get more of a reaction from fans. And so from that point, they added up heavy metal. But when they started doing the gimmick, they kind of add the trio gimmick. They started adding a little bit more, hey, let's act like we're the dirtiest guys. So they started, painting themselves, black, making it look like they were dirty. And it kept getting worse and worse as far as like trying to outdo each other as what they looked like. Heavy metal ended up not wanting to be part of that group. As Mr. Niebla said, heavy metal was more of a rock and roller and not really a guy who's into the music that they were listening to. So he left. They ended up replacing him with Felino. And at that time, it was going to be Mr. Niebla, Nero Casas, Felino. And then I recall Rey Bucanero, right after Felino joined, was going to join in with Zacarias el Perico. So they were going to be the four with Perico in it as their mascot. But they decided to switch Rey Bucanero because even Rey Bucanero wore a pirate outfit. He was doing like everything. He would even like be very abusive towards the parrot. But what they ended up doing was they kind of ended up putting Rey Bucanero with Terrible and Tejano to form Fuerza TRT, TRT. And, it ended up being Mr. Niebla, Felino, Nero Casas, and they kept the parrot, Zacarias. So from that point forward, that became the trio. And if you've heard the stories, they were very dirty. They came up with a lot of different spots. Mr. Niebla came up with the infamous SMS spot, which is known to us as the spit spot. But SMS stands for sudor, moco, saliva, which translates to sweat, booger, saliva. I mean, you could say mucus, but to me, I prefer saying booger. And so, it's the spot where he spits up in the air and catches his own spit. But they kept coming up with other stuff, like Felino would talk about, like, lifting up their armpits, and smelling each other's armpits, doing all that gross stuff. Mr. Niebla did Felino did the whole spot where he would grab his ass and make his opponent smell his hands. They did a lot of gross stuff. If you hear some of the guys tell stories, the majority of them are very offensive about Mr. Niebla. But for the most part, they all talk about how he was really just a guy who loved to have fun. You never knew if he was feeling depressed or anything, or sad, or anything like that, because all you heard about was that he always had a positive attitude. Even when he was drunk, he was very positive. That's what a lot of the guys said. I think the last big thing that happened to Mr. Niebla was really that New Japan CMLL Fantastic Mania tour in 2015, where he was basically kicked off the tour. What happened was being Mr. Niebla, he decided to go out partying in Japan, or he partied too much, and one day he didn't show up. He didn't show up on time or to something that they were going to do. I think I don't know if it was the show, or he just wasn't waking up to get to the bus in time. And when they went and opened his hotel room door, they found him laying on the floor, and they actually had to take him to the hospital. There was a lot of concern that he may have died. That he was going to die, or it was pretty bad. So bad that New Japan was upset with Mr. Niebla and actually with CML, and they made CML pay the hospital bill for Mr. Niebla. And Mr. Niebla even said that he had a very good boss in Paco Alonso and CML, because they always tried to like help him out with his drinking problem. Unfortunately, he just really was somebody that constantly he'd get suspended by CML, and every time he got suspended, we knew, because he had fallen off the wagon, and unfortunately he would be gone for about maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months. Then he would come back and be in his best behavior for probably 3 or 4 months. Then he'd fall off the wagon again and get suspended again. And it went on and on like that for the last decade, or like the last 10, 15 years. And very unfortunate, because he was a very talented wrestler. And it's kind of unfortunate that he had this issue, and I think it really hurt, because he had the talent to be a very good wrestler. But I think this whole the drinking and the partying and all that, it kind of wore out on his body, and he started to gain weight, and he really wasn't the level of worker later in his career, because if you always heard stories about CMLL possibly doing a Mr. Niebla Atlantis mass match. I think there was at one point that was a plan for one of the anniversary shows, but they just could not do it because they could not trust Mr. Niebla to do it. And I think the last time they might have brought it up was when the year around the time Atlantis got hurt, and they kind of killed that because they just couldn't trust Mr. Niebla. And I think also Atlantis suffered that injury, and pretty much he hasn't been the same since then, and he's not been around for a while. But after that tour, it was funny because he showed up in Los Angeles, and Kurt and I actually got to see him at a show. And I remember asking Juventud Guerrera, who I was interviewing, and right after the interview, I told him, I want to interview Mr. Niebla, but I don't know if he's going to accept it because I don't know what he's like. He just had this issue in Japan, and maybe he won't want to talk to us. And Juventud Guerrera said, you don't know Mr. Niebla, I'll go present him. I'll present you to him and ask him if he'll let you do the interview. And, we went. Juventud Guerrera totally did that. He went out of his way to do that. And I've always been appreciative of what he did. And Mr. Niebla said yes, he'd do it. And even he answered my question about what happened in Japan. He did not tell me the actual truth. He said he had a throat injury or something and couldn't continue the tour. When I told other people about his version of what happened in Japan, they immediately laughed and they told me what actually did happen, which was funny. I think at that point a lot of people already knew because the Observer had reported that he had actually had that issue, and I think his return, his departure from the Japan tour had actually already made it the rounds in Japan and Mexico, so a lot of people from there also already knew. But it was just funny to hear him say it, and he was a really nice guy. Pretty much you could tell why he always got so many chances from so many promotions, especially CMLL. Everybody talked about what a nice guy he was, and it's very unfortunate that the drinking, he could never overcome that. I think this upcoming Friday, CMLL is doing their a tribute show for him. There was a tribute show for him previously earlier in the month, and I think a lot of people are going to miss him just because he was very charismatic, very talented. If he would have ever gotten his act together and not had this drinking problem, I think he probably would have. I think he could have had another good run, because there were periods of time when he was sober, and he still could go, but it was just so inconsistent. And then unfortunately, CML started booking these, really bad matches. Usually Peste Negra would have opposing them, they would have Diamante Azul, or, they'd have these really weird matches that unfortunately all these guys are involved in these. Who would have thought, when the Ingobernables left, that we would still be talking about them still having problems with certain matches, because you would think the upper card would be so much stronger, not having Bestia the ring in the promotion, and Sieber the main man, and so many of the other guys not being there so frequently. But CML still has found a way to make their matches boring, and it's unfortunate. But like I said, Mr. Niebla, really charismatic. I think that's what I'm going to remember most. I think you're going to remember a wrestler who was very charismatic late in his career. He had two different career paths. The young Mr. Niebla, who was very athletic, very talented, but didn't really have a lot of charisma. And then his second run, being very charismatic and being a very fun character, a very entertaining guy to watch in interviews, and and a wrestler that also, and person that had who was battling a very serious personal issue for so many years, and did it so publicly. I wish he could have recovered from that, like I said, and been one of the positive stories in Lucha Libre. Unfortunately, he passed away, and he'll be missed. The other wrestler that passed away that really hit hard was La Parka, AAA. He died on January 11th, 2020, due to lungs and kidney failure. He had been in the hospital. Since the injury that he suffered in, I would say late October, where he missed that tope on Roosh, landed short, and hit the barricade, and he never really he it just, I mean, I don't think he was ever going to recover from. He was never going to wrestle again. I don't think that was even possible. But I think a lot of people had hoped that he would at least have a long life afterwards, or a reasonably good life afterwards. Unfortunately, he did not. It did there was just too much for him to overcome from that. And a guy who was around for so many years, and one of the first things that a lot of people got confused was that you had a lot of people who could not tell which La Parka passed away for whatever reason. People still can't tell. I'm pretty sure even with La Parka dying, there's probably people who are still wondering if Ali Park, is still with us, because that's the way a lot of people. They're probably thinking that he's the one that's passed away, and it's unfortunate about that. But it's also a warning to any wrestlers who decide to use a similar gimmick, especially during a similar time period. You're going to have this issue. Should this happen to you as well? But it was so weird, because there was even like people who wrote about La Parka passing away, and it was like they wrote about LA Park, and it's like, no, that's not you got the wrong one. I know there were a few people who messaged me and asked me if I was which one was the one that passed away, and I kept telling them it's the AAA one, not the one that you saw in WCW. And in fact, when this AAA La Parka passed away, a lot of us who were tweeting or posting about it, or some of the earlier people that reported it, at the very end they would write, this was not the La Parka you saw in WCW. That is now LA Park. And they would write his real name, Adolfo Tapia, because LA Park does reveal his actual name, just because it's so confusing. And La Parka, this one was a totally different character, a one that actually a lot of people had a very there's very polarizing character within Lucha Libre, the community, the fan base, because you had a lot of fans who just could never accept him as anything other than being the poor copy of LA Park, the original La Parka, or they just could not get over the fact that he was just getting the star treatment because of the previous character. And it happens with all these guys. You get it with Psicosis and other, the two guys who would do the Psicosis character. And I'm sure it's going to happen over the years with anybody else. Mystico Caristico guys. The one positive about Mystico Caristico is that Caristico changed his name to something else, and he's kind of but you still get people who can't tell them apart, especially if they're not frequently watching CMLL and don't realize that they're not even like the same guy. But with La Parka, I kind of think he was never the level of worker that LA Park never was. I mean, he wasn't even close to his level, but very early in his career, he was actually, I would say he was a pretty good wrestler at best. Someone who could actually do some stuff in the ring. I think once he was given the La Parka gimmick, he realized that, it was more about the character, and he didn't really have to, he had to make sure that he focused more on the character, and he wasn't going to do all this other stuff that went with it. And he was actually pretty decent. I actually thought he was very entertaining as far as doing the La Parka character, and I don't think a lot of people gave him that credit, because a lot of wrestling fans, they only view the work rate, but they don't view the other stuff that goes into it, like the personality, the charisma, interviews, stuff like that. They kind of want to just, is this guy is a great wrestler because he was very good in the ring, but I think there's a little bit more of a forgiveness towards interviews, so that, I think, aspect, it makes more sense to a lot of fans. But like, if a guy is like super charismatic and maybe can't work at all, it takes some fans a little bit of a while to get used to them. And it's even harder for guys who are masked, because I think for whatever reason, a lot of fans who may not have grown up with Lucha Libre, they kind of don't really the first thing they say is like, how am I supposed to know this guy's charismatic if I can't see his face, his facial expressions? But a lot of wrestlers, luchadors, they use their body to kind of express a lot of the charisma or the personality of their characters. So you kind of got that, with La Parka dancing and doing all this stuff, and a lot of the body movement that he did, he added a lot of that stuff. I always loved the spot where he would point down to the ring and pretending that there's like a quarter on the floor on the mat, and then you would see the Rudos or his opponents looking down, and then he would like kind of like do the whole flip them on the nose or something, or like grab their head and like put it in between his in the midsection. I always thought that was a funny spot. But La Parka, he actually had a pretty he was an independent wrestler early in his career, and he kind of got the attention of Antonio Peña through actually the first Volador, Remo Banda, who is Volador Jr.'s father, Ramon Ibarra, introduced him to Antonio Peña, and he kind of brought him into the promotion, into AAA. I don't know if that was actually, I don't know if he introduced them when I think he might have introduced them before AAA even started, because the way I understood it was that, Peña called him afterwards when he was starting AAA, but I think he might have met him back when he was in EMLL at that time, CMLL. And, but when he started forming AAA, he brought him in, and he brought him in as, I think he brought him in originally as his previous character, and then the character used in the Independence. Then he switched them over to Karis La Momia, and he had a very good run as Karis La Momia, kind of more of a mid-card wrestler, teaming up with the monster type characters like Ice Killer and Damien 666 and Halloween and all these other characters, Hijo de Espectro. So he was kind of more of a character of that type. And then in late 1996, really around 1995, a lot of the bigger stars in AAA were starting to wrestle in the United States. They had made their way into ECW and then later into WCW. And in 96, that kind of became a bigger thing. You had Konnan, Rey Mysterio Jr., Psicosis. They were kind of the first three guys to come in. Then later in 1996, you had Juventud Guerrera, Super Callo, I think was in that group, La Parka, the original La Parka. And a few other guys started going in as well. And so you started late 96, early 97, you started seeing these guys getting splitting their time war in the United States and Mexico. And Antonio Peña needed some stars to like fill those voids on his shows. So one of the things he used to do, like if like a wrestler would leave or go be busy working elsewhere, he would give him the character. He would do the character, but it would be like a junior version. So he created La Parka Jr. And La Parka Jr. It was kind of like a way to trick the fans into believing that La Parka was here. But then, then he would say, hey, no, we didn't promise you La Parka. We brought you La Parka Jr. And, that was the way. And I think initially there wasn't like a lot of resentment towards him because La Parka Jr., everybody kind of knew it was a junior. And for the longest time period, that's how he was known. And then LA Park or La Parka left, was part of that whole exodus of guys who left along with Konnan to go to WCW and to work Promo Azteca in Mexico. And at that point, kind of like Peña started pushing La Parka Jr. a little higher, and then he kind of started like they started to get rid of the whole junior in his name, and it kind of became La Parka. And by like the early 2000s, it basically was no longer La Parka Jr. The one thing that a lot of people would refer to him as, like, they would always add the AAA because, when WC, it's kind of funny because when they changed the name, he became La Parka, but at the same time, WCW was closing up in early 2000, like in the early 2000s, and LA Park was working more frequently in Mexico as La Parka. He had that amazing feud with Hijo Santo on the Independence, throughout Mexico, it's primarily in Tijuana and the Monterrey area. They had the feud, and one of the things that Peña didn't want was he was battling La Parka, the original, over the name, and he didn't want him to use the name, so he started referring to La Parka Jr. as La Parka. And that became like this huge deal, a lot of resentment from LA Park. And that's really at that point when a lot of people got started taking Adolfo Tapia, LA Park's side in this in the whole name thing. And the AAA La Parka got a lot of negative reaction from the fans. Not the AAA fans. The AAA fans were a little more casual and more into they weren't as hard on him, whereas the fans, the diehards, and the fans who kind of knew the difference, they were a little harder on him. One of the things that was funny was when I was writing the bio obit, which is on the website. Both I have obit bios on La Parka and Mr. Niebla on the LuchaWorld website if you guys want to read them. And one of the things about the early 2000s was that La Parka, Televisa was doing these awards for their sports, and they would do awards for different best football player, best soccer player, best luchador, and they would do this. And since LA Park was not with CMLL at that point and not with AAA, they had La Parka from AAA. They would have 3 or 4 guys, usually 2 from AAA and 2 from CMLL, and La Parka was one of the guys from AAA. And when they would talk about the AAA La Parka, they would show you clips of La Parka AAA, but then they would show you clips of the old La Parka. But then they would also say, they would credit him with winning the Mask of Pure Oath, which he never did. Although La Parka, I will say that he did win a couple of big mask matches, but he did not take one of the bigger mask matches that LA Park won, which was the one of Pure Oath, and Pure Oath Jr., not the Bestia the Ring one, Rush's father, not that guy, but the previous one, which was one of the far bigger stars of Lucha Libre in the 90s and early 2000s. And so that kind of even made people more upset. But as the years went on, I think there was a little bit more of an acceptance for La Parka, just because I think you could tell the difference between the two. And I think a lot of people kind of figured he wasn't very good. I don't even think it was an acceptance. It was more the AAA fans not being okay with it. I think a lot of people aren't really bringing it up, but as the years went on, he wasn't very good in the ring, but he was very successful when he was actually good. 5-time Rey de Reyes winner. I think towards the end he kind of was winning that just because I think the last one he won was really during that time period where he was just one of the Rodon's favorite wrestlers, so they kind of gave him that as to keep him relevant in the promotion. And but really the two things, there's actually a lot of stuff that happened in La Parka's career while in AAA. He won the Mask of Cibernetico at the Triple Mania in 2004. In 2006, he won Muerte Cibernetica's mask, which who later became El Mesias. I think those were really his 2 big mask matches. He's won other mask matches, and then he suffered that car accident that really changed the way he wrestled. He wasn't as he wasn't able to do as much as he used to, because you could tell one of his arms didn't have the same strength. So as he got older, you could tell he was performing more with favoring one of his arms, and the other arm he kind of would leave alone. There's actually one match I remember there was when he was doing his heel run. He had a very brief heel run too, by the way, for about 4 or 5 months as a Rudo. And he had this really good match where he actually did everything with one arm, and it looked really good. It was a really fun match. I think I even brought this up when that happened on one of the episodes. If you go back to that one, I can't remember which, but it was it happened in the I think it was 2014 or so when this heel turn when this happened. But it was really good. But really the big feud that came about was in 2010 when LA Park returned to AAA after being gone for 15 years, and they had that year's Triple Mania had the first ever encounter between LA Park and La Parka, the Battle of La Parkas, with the name on the line. It wasn't the mask on the line. It was actually the name, the rights to the name, and all this stuff. LA Park won that. It was a one-sided match. LA Park just absolutely destroyed him, and it was a huge match. And, I think at the very end of it, LA Park kind of just said, keep the name. I no longer need it. I'm a bigger star now as LA Park. And La Parka continued on. They no longer had any issues over the names, especially since LA Park was using the name. LA Park has been, everywhere, off and on, CMLL, AAA, independent, in the last 20 years, he's been doing all that stuff. So there really hasn't been a lot of issues from that. And I think that's really the big thing about La Parka. What I think most people should remember about him was that he was very charismatic. I don't think he was quite the level of talent that LA Park was, especially as that character La Parka. But I think he brought something completely different. I think he was more of a. I wrote this in the obit where I think when you look at the La Parka that LA Park, Adolfo Tapia worked as, it was more of he was always a rudo at that point in time, and he was more of a rougher wrestler. He still did a lot of comedy spots, but he was far more of there was a bit of an edge to that character, more of a, like, what LA Park is now, just, a badass. He always had that badass personality to him. And, whereas La Parka, he always looked like somebody was just having fun. Somebody who just liked to dance, have fun, party. And it kind of like, it was something that he kind of expressed in this. He had tons of charisma also as that character. And I think that was the big difference between the two characters. He was more of a fun character, whereas the LA Park character was more of a, I'm going to beat the crap out of you type of character. And, I do think he's another guy that, it's unfortunate that I think he died at the age of 54, and he had a lot of, I don't know if, it's unfortunate, died young. Both him and Mr. Niebla died very young, and it's very unfortunate what happened between, with both of them. I don't know, like, it's, I think with La Parka, it kind of tells you the risk. It shows, the way from what happened with the accident that he suffered, it kind of tells you how risky pro wrestling is. And he did a tope suicida, so, a lot of people, they don't want guys to do a lot of these crazy flips, but, you could suffer an injury, and these guys take a lot of risks just entering the ring. I mean, we've seen guys break their tear ACL just flipping into the ring. So, and we've seen guys get hurt just with simple bumps that, you think look simple, and it's like they get hurt, suffer a separated shoulder, break suffer neck injuries, back injuries. It could be anything. And, I think it's something that I think you always, as a fan, you kind of have to, like, can't be too critical of what these guys do, and be a little more understanding that, what they do is to entertain us, and there's a risk involved. And, I think we just hope that after every show, every match, that everybody just comes out of it okay. And that, you can't really worry about it too much, because if these guys start worrying about it, we wouldn't have anything. We wouldn't have wrestling. The other big news, now that I've talked about this, is really one of the weird stories to close out, to actually start off 2020 and to close out 2019. And it involves Konnan and Psicosis II, also known as Ripper. Really strange, because this actually started in October of last October over, just a simple comment. Psicosis II did an interview, and he was asked why he wasn't in AAA, and he kind of said that the reason he's not in AAA was because Konnan doesn't like him. I mean, honestly, it's no secret. I don't know why Konnan decided to respond to that comment on Twitter, other than Konnan is, likes to like get involved in this stuff. I mean, I was talking to a couple of wrestlers at recently, and we were talking about this, luchadors, and I was telling them, like, why would you even reply to that when Konnan has known this guy since like the mid 90s or early 90s. He should have known that this guy was going to react that way. And I think he probably forgot and probably thought, this is just one of the many people that I'm going to talk shit about. Yeah, he's kind of become like a version of like what most of us are, where you kind of see guys just trying to stir shit up on Twitter, and you know, wrestlers get upset at at those fans for stirring things up and not knowing about the business and stuff like that. You know, you get that with Cornette also. They attack other people, and you don't want to do that, because trust me, one day one of these guys is going to end up showing up and confronting you, especially if you're like a celebrity, like what Cornette and Konnan or any other wrestler might be, or former pro wrestler, or anybody involved, or any celebrity. And so Konnan makes this comment towards Ripper about, or Psicosis II, about how you know, he doesn't see him in any other promotion, and so he must not be somebody that's really that good or anything. So you have this little bit of a back and forth between Psicosis II and Konnan, and Psicosis II tells him, you know, I'll see you in Leon soon, and but it didn't happen in Leon, Guanajuato. What ended up happening was it happened at the Impact tapings in Mexico City just a couple of days ago, and it was so weird, because we knew this was going to happen. A lot of people who know Psicosis II, they will tell you he's not one of those guys you want to mess around with, because I met him. I mean, the dude scared me. Like, the first time I met him, the guy does not look like somebody you want to fuck around with. He turned out to be a very respectful and cordial guy, especially when I started talking about his python Kendra and his snake, and it's his pet snake, by the way. That's, you know, if you never saw him in CMLL, maybe you don't know about that. But if you watch some CML, you know that he had a pet python that he would carry into to the ring with him, and so. But he's not somebody you want to mess around with. And there's wrestlers who have said that. You know, it wasn't just me saying, oh, you know, just as a fan being like, oh, and seeing him without his mask saying, oh, I wouldn't want to mess with him. You know, he's somebody that's going to be short tempered, especially because this has been building up for years too. It's not like, you know, Konnan has not. It's not like the first time Konnan has said something about this version of the Psicosis. So at the Impact tapings, I think it was the Friday tapings, Konnan shows up, and who's there with a camera? Some guy's filming it. We later found out that Psicosis II showed up with two friends and three friends, because the third one had a camera filming his cell phone filming the confrontation, and Psicosis II goes over and starts yelling at Konnan. And Konnan is like, he doesn't know what's going on, and tells him, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. You know, obviously I'm pretty sure he remembered, because he remembered it vividly when he was talking about it in his podcast. So Psicosis was like, you don't remember? Psicosis II was like, you don't remember? And then he kind of just slapped him across the face, and Konnan backed away. And at first you would think, you know, maybe Konnan's backing away because he's, you know, he's worried about what's going on, and which he did say he was, because there were more people. He noticed there were more people with Psicosis too. That's something you don't like, since we're watching it from the perspective of just the camera. We don't really see, or the cell phone. We don't really see what else is going on until the guy turns around and starts showing other stuff. But then you kind of see Konnan back away. You see this lady kind of trying to keep Psicosis II trying to calm him down. She kind of gets moved away. And fortunately, it doesn't go beyond that, because Konnan backs away and Psicosis II leaves. I kind of, you know, it later, you know, Konnan said that he was told by the press afterwards that the guy who filmed it was trying to get people to pay for the video footage, trying to sell that, and nobody took him up on it, so he ended up just uploading it. I don't know if he uploaded it to YouTube or to Facebook or wherever he uploaded it first. And that's how it ended up all over the place. And I think it's fortunate that it didn't get any further. There wasn't any more to it in that incident, in that moment, because it could have been a lot worse. Both guys gave their versions, their perspectives of what went down. And I kind of think they both kind of got carried away in what they were saying. Konnan saying that if he knew those two guys or those other guys weren't, because he said thugs, there was more than just the two. Like I said, there was also the guy with the camera or filming it, and he said that if those guys weren't there, he might have maybe thrown a punch at him. he would have defended himself. But a lot of people, like, I mean, honestly, if you watch that, Psicosis 2 looked like jacked. He was really jacked, and Konnan is in no condition. And even Disco Inferno said, you know, you have a bad back, and Konnan said, yeah, I have 2 stints in my heart also. So, you know, if it would have led to something worse, I'm pretty sure Konnan wouldn't have gone. It would have not gone well for him. So it was fortunate that it didn't get carried away. And with Psicosis 2, I mean, you know, honestly, what are you thinking? I mean, you do something like that, and I mean, thankfully nothing happened to Konnan. But if something happens, you're going to fucking prison for you're going to prison. You know, it's not. I don't see the point. I mean, that's the thing with these guys. You know, this is something where it just should have just ended. You know, Psicosis 2 should have just been like, yeah, I'm not on TV. You know, big deal. Okay, that's it. But I also think Konnan kind of just fed to it because he had to respond to that. I mean, just don't reply to it. You know why he's not on TV. Konnan even admitted afterwards. He's not on TV because he's not a guy he really wants to work with. Just write that. That's it. Nobody would have been upset. But they kept on going, and it led to that. And I don't understand it. It's like you can't talk sense into these guys because neither one of them, you know, they have to prove their point, and they did it. You know, they wanted to wave their dicks and see who was the bigger man, you know, and unfortunately this sort of thing happened. I mean, it's so stupid. You know, what was going to come out of it? You know, Psicosis 2, guess what? Now you're not working in AAA. You weren't anyway, so why the fuck do this? Konnan, you weren't going to use them. Don't even get involved. You should have known better. And both of them, I mean, they both look bad to me, honestly. Then they did interviews afterwards talking about the situation. And I thought it was interesting just because they both kind of like were talking about how they were both happy that it didn't end up being any worse. But they also, like, all their grievances were just, you know, they were silly. And it just became big, something that they did for big news. And really, honestly, I think Psicosis 2 was going out there with the intention of getting more press for his bookings and all that. I mean, come on. The guy, who could forget a couple years ago when he decided to like back out of working a show because he found out when they booked Rebellion, which was Penta, Phoenix, Garza Jr. and Daga. When he found out they were getting paid more, he basically backed out of working that show just because, you know, he wanted to get paid at their level. You know, we obviously know that that's also one of those, you know, there was also that motive. You know, you don't think, you know, I know Konnan said that a lot of promoters weren't going to book him, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, people booked Angel o Demonio for something far more serious after throwing a cinder block. And they've even joked on it on Mas Lucha how Psicosis 2 is now going to be booked for the big slap, La Cachetada, and that he gave Konnan. So I think that's going to end up, you know, he's going to end up getting far more bookings as well just because of that. I mean, he even said that one of Chavo Lutero III contacted him and asked him to return to CMLL because of that. It would have been funny. Although, to be fair, I mean, even though they brought up Psicosis 2, honestly, he'd be an upgrade to a lot of the guys that they have working in CMLL right now. Honestly, if they brought him in, he's already, I mean, with the guys that are in Fantastic Mania, we had Dark Magic working semi-main event matches in Guadalajara. That tells you how thin the roster is when guys are working so many other places and they're running 2 shows at once. When you're getting Dark Magic working semi-main event matches, you know that the Cuato-san, you know the roster's weak, really kind of thinned out. So Psicosis 2 wouldn't be that bad, but yeah, I just thought it was a silly situation, made for some news. I don't know what's going to come of it. I mean, by the end, what is it? By the end, within a few weeks, we'll probably have forgotten about this, unless they keep bringing it up. And who knows? Maybe knowing these 2 guys, they're probably going to keep bringing it up because you know Konnan's not going to stay quiet about it, and you know Psicosis 2 isn't going to he's going to want to comment on it as well. It's going to go on and on. Psicosis 2 has done a bunch of interviews since then. Well, the other thing was that I kind of think this was kind of also to build up the upcoming match. I think it's Vanguardia who's running a show, and the main event is I think it's Nicho versus Psicosis original Psicosis, Nicho el Millonario, versus Psicosis II. I think it's a tag match with the Miedo Extremo and Ciclope being in the opposing each other as well. But this is, I'm pretty sure this is going to get a little more interest for that match, just because, Konnan brought up how Nicho el Millonario didn't want to work with Psicosis back when they were in AAA because, he was so rough with him and he was so stiff, and he thought that maybe it was going to lead to something worse if they continued to have matches. I think they've had a couple matches since that time period, so I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen. You never know, but, I don't think it's going to happen. I'm sure they're probably going to do some angle with it from the slap. It's silly. But, it's entertaining. Like I said, at least it didn't, now that it's happened, you don't really, and nothing really came of it. We could look back at it and say it was amusing. But like I said, you knew this was going to happen. I expect this to happen with any guy who's going to be like using Twitter, social media, podcasts to talk stuff, especially guys like Konnan and Jim Cornette. They're always going to have people that are going to want to, if they say the wrong thing to the wrong person, this sort of thing can happen. And it ended up happening. That's about it for this episode. A pretty somber episode, honestly, with the passing of La Parka and Mr. Niebla. But hopefully, like the Konnan Psicosis II incident brought it back full circle. I want to close out mentioning that I'll be making a change to the Patreon page. I'm going to be adding a new feature to the $5 option. It's going to be something I had a lot of people asking me about certain things when I stopped doing my other my other website, and this is kind of something I want to do for Patreon, as far as I'm going to be adding something to that. Basically, it's going to be the adding videos to that, where you can actually download them and instead of me mailing shit out, you subscribe, you'll be able to get something every month. Honestly, I think that's a pretty good, it's going to be a good deal. And also at the same time, I don't have to worry about mailing stuff out, shipping, worrying about every 6 months postage getting an increase, which became a pain in the ass. Honestly, guys, it was something that was horrible. I just added a magazine write-up for July 6, 1973 from Boxy Lucha, I think. And it has, it's really a good, it's a short write-up, because I think that during that time period, there wasn't as much, there was a little more boxing in Boxy Lucha magazines at that point. So, but there's a really good, results for the shows that I think the late June shows. There's a really good, results for Rene Guajardo winning a hair match, and there's a Alfonso Dantes title match. Really good stories. Check that out. Also, keep up with the LuchaWorld website. Go to LuchaWorld.com for the latest news. I also have the YouTube channel. If you guys want to listen to these podcasts instead of going on the MP3 version, and you just want to go on YouTube, you could listen to it on the Retro Wrestling YouTube channel. There's some links on the website to that channel, and you'll find not only the Slam and Stand podcast, but also the Lucha World podcast. And I was going to do some other stuff on there, but like I said, I kind of want to get all the old stuff out of the way, so it doesn't kind of like mix and match. It kind of I don't want it to look confusing. So I added some newer stuff early on just to get people interested in it. And then now I'm kind of like focusing just on getting all that stuff out of the way. Once I'm done with that, then I'll start adding newer content. It's going to be something fun. So check all that stuff out. Check out retrowrestling.com as well. So, there's a lot of for you guys to check out. I think I may be doing too much writing of late. It doesn't look like I do, but I think I may be doing a little too much. May have to figure out a way to I may need to come up with a solution to just cut down on everything that I do. But as long as I'm enjoying it and I'm not looking at it as it's not stressing me out, just because it's easy work and it's fun just because it's wrestling, and I don't really have to do it all the time. I mean, I don't have somebody overlooking me and telling me to do it all the time. It's me doing it when I want, when I can, and I'm still sticking with Lucha World, I think there's been fewer Lucha reports just because there really has been times where there's not been a lot of news. So, but you're still getting 2 or 3 Lucha reports and the Postermanias. And I think right now I kind of got to get caught up with retro wrestling. But, like I said, it's all for fun. The Patreon page, there's going to be some new stuff. Check that out. And I will talk to you guys again real soon. So long.